Hello there, everybody. This is Zoe Lindsay over at Blumira, joined by our co-founder Matt and some of my colleagues to give you a breakdown. This is Blumira Briefings, our new series where we're going to go through the news of the week, highlight a few things that you may have missed, and also give you a short update on what's happening in our world. If you're having a hard time keeping up with your RSS feed the way that I usually do, we hope that this helps give you a little bit of context on what's been going on. As I mentioned, my name is Zoe Lindsay. I'm a security strategist here at Blumira. Let's go around the horn. Everybody say hello. Matt, you want to intro yourself?
Hi, everyone. I am the founder of Blumira. My background's in cybersecurity and IT. And for those of you who've probably seen me on Blumira stuff, excited to talk more about what's happening in the world of security. And Mike?
Hey there, Mike Toole. I'm Director of Security and IT for Blumira. My background is mostly in cloud security, a little bit of everything, all over the place. I'm a security news junkie, so this is fun for me. I do this normally just for my own edification.
You're definitely one of the top posters in our own security news channel, sharing what we're seeing with the company. So definitely a great fit to join. And Nick?
Hey everyone, my name is Nick Brigman. I am the Security Operations Manager as well as Technical Support Manager. Really excited for this. We see a lot of the stuff on the front lines with my team, so excited to dive in with the team and talk a little bit about the stuff in the news.
Awesome. So before we get into the news of the week, Matt, you had suggested, I thought this was a great idea. You know, we see a lot of trends happening weekly within our own platform. And so you had pulled together a little kind of top 10 of the top detections or findings that we're seeing in the last week. So, what's new?
So it's interesting, a lot of what we see across our what we call threats, suspects, and risks tend to have pretty similar patterns week over week. Sometimes we have things that break out. This week, what we're seeing really across a lot of our threat environment are Sophos. For those of you who use Sophos, what kind of websites are being blocked, how those websites are being blocked, what kind of websites are they going to, your users going to? That tends to be one of our top threats. It is again this week. Another big one that we see for those of you who use Sentinel-1, and for those of you who are watching this, Sentinel-1 is one of Blumira's largest data sources. We see it very often when it comes to our users. That is a number 2 threat, which is the unmitigated suspicious threat. For those of you who use Sentinel-1, it can be a little touchy at times, and at times it gets a little worried about things. But that is our number 2 this week for threats. And number 3 is an interesting one that climbed up to number 3 this week, which is the Azure failed single-factor PowerShell authentication, where for those of you who are using 365, those of you who are using Microsoft Azure, there is some kind of inherent pain of those of you who left single factor open to do PowerShell scripting against it. In those cases, it's worth checking. That is a top threat for us, primarily because attackers do use it, but also the amount of risk that could come from allowing that to continue to occur is a big one that we tend to point at. And I'm sure Nick's team fields a whole lot of those questions when it comes down to how we are supporting people kind of across that effort. In the world of suspects, it is very common in 365 for us to see kind of 2 at the top 3, which is like mailbox permissions changes are a big one that we see from a suspect perspective in 365, primarily because that is what an attacker is going to do, but also people just tend to do it a lot. So it is one of those areas that, in the nature of security and IT, where, and we'll talk about this a little later with a whole other topic, where you have to pay attention to something that at times is just a normal business action in your environment and kind of really ascertain, was this permission change intended to happen? The other one is impossible travel. I think impossible travel for us, as well as a lot of you, is really a lesson learned broadly in that GeoIP is terrible and will always be terrible. It just is not good. And while it can identify threats, it also identifies VPN changes, IP blocks changing, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So that's why we positioned it really as a suspect. The second one, and really this fits within the top 10 as a whole, is Splashtop, but also TeamViewer and LogMeIn. We see a lot of different remote access tools While a lot of those are used in normal day-to-day business work, they're also used just as much by attackers. So that really aligns back to how are you evaluating what's happening in your environment? And how are you making sure that you're getting the most insight out of it? And last but not least, we also look at risks, kind of how people are getting into your networks, what kind of connections are you exposing? And for us, the top three are SSH from public, which is something that we will forever annoy people about, I think, here at Blumira, of like, yeah, we understand why, but there's risks with doing it. Microsoft 365, for those of you within the US, authentication from outside the US, really determining how your conditional access policies are being built. Do you allow people to log in from outside the US? How are they logging in? And lastly, which is always scary for me, SMB connection from public IP. Anything exposed, we push on this really hard here at Blumira, but it is a common-ish pattern that we see from legacy environments, especially where we're seeing SMB exposed to the internet primarily for file shares. For those of you who do expose SMB to the internet, please stop. It will make us all feel better in this world, just generally speaking. A few others in the top 10 as well, but those are the big ones for this week on the top three.
Thank you for that, Matt. We're going to try and include those right at the top each week so that you tuning in can get that quick update. Let's get to the headlines. So before we move into some more of the discussion topics, I did want to make mention of the security flaw that was reported pretty widely this week in Next.js. CVE 2025-29927 has been released, pretty critical CVSS score of 9.1. And it is a middleware flaw that, as I understand it, is skipping some fundamental authentication checks, right, Mike?
Yeah, so Next.js is like a pretty common web framework that a lot of people use to just cobble web apps together, or it's kind of like your base for building a web app. And this flaw is real interesting because Next.js has like an internal header that you send to basically like basically allow internal connections to do things, right? Like, so maybe you have a web page up, you're already authenticated, but now you're need to do X, Y, and Z in the web app. Well, apparently you can bypass that that header and just do whatever you want, including bypass session cookie checks, bypass like any kind of permissions, just pretty much do anything you want in the web app, which is a big fun logic flaw that is not great. So yeah, patch that one ASAP.
Definitely one that you're going to want to patch. And we'll have links for all of these articles. Specifically, we're going to have a link to details on how you can remediate for this one. So if you're making use of Next.js, make sure to check that out. This one should be fun for us to talk about. So Microsoft Security Copilot is adding AI agents. The first one coming out supposed to help address volume in phishing investigations. There's 10 other task-specific agents that are coming out. And plans to have more come out both from Microsoft themselves and from their trusted partner ecosystem. I thought this was an interesting story, mostly because we're seeing a lot of discussion about AI enablement and expansion of security functions in different tools and platforms. This seemed like a good opportunity to talk a little bit about kind of where we stand on that. What are folks' thoughts on integrating AI into your security processes and workflows?
Well, AI can be a great tool for helping you with the next step. What do I do next? So I think saving time in this busy security world, this is a great thing. But as we read about it, it comes with some risk. There are some scenarios where the AI might not see something that's actually malicious happening. And then you don't look at it because you think, oh, the AI has got my back, when maybe the AI missed it. Another thing that comes to mind is if I were an attacker, I'd get my hands on this and figure out what the AI is looking for, what it might not look for, and how I can blend in without being reported. So it's interesting. It's going to save people time, but does come with some risk.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how the true functionality about this drops out. When I see AI agents, what I hear is we put a bunch of special prompts into these agents, and now they're going to do something else, which is okay. Like there's nothing wrong with that. And it'll be interesting to see how we evolve over this next year when it comes to this kind of thing. You know, going back to like RSA last year, where AI was just the thing. One of the big topics we heard from larger enterprises was they didn't want to pay more money for it. It wasn't really a need to pay more money for it. If you could take $1 and you could hire another person, don't you want another person to support your org rather than give more money to Microsoft? It was essentially the. And so it'll be really interesting to see where these drop out. Totally agree with Nick. You know, in our internal testing on generative AI and how it applies, I think the most interesting part for me is that most models have a tendency to be very strict, and you have to do a lot of prompting to pull back on some of that strictness. So as they get into the trusted kind of community and have those agents kind of pop up, I agree. Like if I was an attacker, I would get into that trusted community and drop an agent there as fast as I can at this point. So it'll be really interesting to see how it is evolving. You know, there's the SOC AI agents that are starting to grow out. They get attached to different tools. There's about 1 million different uses for generative AI at this point. It's really interesting when it comes to, you know, how does that change accountability? How does that change time really? And if you're having to go back and validate the phishing analysis because it analyzed, you know, 3,000 phishing emails for you, it's in my experience, it gets a lot harder for people when you no longer have the human to depend on, and you're depending on the ghost in the machine to make the right determination for you.
Yeah. I think like as a rule of thumb, when you're trying to look at where you can improve the process with AI, it's not that different from taking a look at where you can improve a process through any kind of automation. Like the more tedious and predictable it is, probably the better that's going to work being outsourced. The more fuzzy and judgment is necessary to apply to that process, like I would not outsource that judgment. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how these things shake out as we start to get some more real world experience.
Yes.
Moving on down the line, 23andMe filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And we have seen some headlines about a breach that seems to have contributed to this change in their business. But I think what we're seeing more coverage of this week is an announcement coming out by California's AG advising that people who have used 23andMe delete their account and remove their data prior to the bankruptcy going through and them losing access to doing so. And I thought that this was just kind of a good example of something that certainly isn't a unique problem, not just having to figure out what you're going to do to protect your data, but also what your plan is if something happens to a vendor that has your data, whether that's as a purchaser, individual purchaser, or as an organization. So I'm curious. I mean, let's start with Mike having to keep this in mind for us too internally, figuring out our own processes. What do you think about when you're taking a look at a new potential vendor? When we're trying to figure out if there's somebody trustworthy that we are okay storing any of that data.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's like a trust relationship, right? And the best thing you can do up front is like kind of gauge where you at with the trust relationship with that vendor, right? How much do I initially trust them? And then you just kind of track over time how that changes, right? You can never fully understand like the internal workings of any vendor. You never will. But also like there's a bunch of variables where things just happen in the world, right? So all you can really do is try to reduce the risk of the data you're giving to people, use the minimum amount you can, right? The least severe things, right? Like go down that path. And then at the end of the day, just kind of keep track of the trust levels that you have out there in the world. That's kind of the big overview of this. For 23andMe, it's like, I think the big thing people have to remember too is like it's medical data.
Yeah.
Some people forget because it's like a consumerized, ancestry product, right?
Yeah.
But it is medical data, and like that might be somewhat useful now. It might be even more useful for somebody later. So like, if you have any thoughts about that, now is the time to maybe try to get it deleted.
And I think it's notable that this announcement came out of California. Of course, California having much better than average privacy laws in place with the CCPA. And in our prep for recording, Mike, you brought up a fun little tip that I think I'd love to share with the audience too, as something that they may find helpful when they're trying to remediate these things for themselves.
Yeah, this generally works for like more reputable data brokers and like publicly traded companies, but like there are laws on the books like the CCPA that basically dictate if you live in California and you request someone to delete their data, like you have the service has to do it. But no one really checks if you live in California, so it kind of applies to all of us if we really want to. I'm not a lawyer though.
Always the important caveat to make sure that we include.
Yes, very, very.
Uh,
Yes, I wanted to quickly note, like, the 23 data breach for 23andMe was an interesting data breach because it was cred stuffing to stealing data from basically the ancestry network. It was not taking from the medical side of 23andMe, but rather how can we build a network of specific groups of people, specifically Jewish and Chinese people. So it's a really interesting path for 23andMe to say, well, that data breach is the cause of our bankruptcy. Therefore, our data is at risk. Therefore, your data is at risk. It'll be interesting to see where they go. But I think it's a good kind of going off what Mike said. I would push that forward to say it's a great reason to meet with your vendors. I think that's one of the things that we often, from a vendor point of view, want to push people toward, like, you should talk to us. You should meet with us more often. Meet with your vendors so you can build that trust up, so when those kind of things are going to happen, or so you can have that conversation if it ever happens.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't start a relationship after the fact. That's just not how it works.
I think this is a good reminder to be very diligent about what you're doing with your data and who you're giving it to. Obviously, this stuff is super interesting. Everyone wants to know about their ancestry and the traits that make them them, but you have to consider, is it worth giving this information to a vendor that might go out of business, like we're seeing here?
Absolutely. Well, I think in general, I mean, we're big proponents of, regularly reviewing your environment, regularly reviewing your asset inventory and what resources that you have out there in the context of an organization, and considering, likely risks and having a game plan in place for them. I think making sure that you're thinking about what happens if something happens to your vendor and keeping some notes on good questions that you want to ask as you start those conversations is going to help make sure that, doesn't slip your mind in the moment when you're finding out about some cool new thing. Next up, we've got a story about some fake SEMrush ads that are targeting SEO pros and their Google accounts. This was a series of fake ads that redirected to a phishing page that only offered a login with Google option. And what I thought was interesting about this was the way that the way that the attack targeted its victims, knowing that people managing SEO accounts also likely have access to other high value business accounts.
Yeah, it's such a good vertical to attack, especially on the SEO side. No offense to the marketing side, and on the marketing side, to really drive that attainment. Fake ads have done such a great job of dropping any sort of thing, from stealing creds to being able to kind of push from the standpoint of droppers. We've seen them used from the standpoint of like advanced IP scanner fake ads to drop Trojans to then spawn ransomware. So it's more of a bummer from the standpoint of like why allow these ads continuously? Like maybe don't do that, but money is nice, so that is why.
Yeah,
Very true.
there are some programs out there that do this specifically for email, where they click links, check them, see if they're known bad. There's even some programs that stand up a sandbox and do it for you. Click through all the links on the page. It might be worth checking into those link checkers for things like this if they continue to pop up.
I think this is also a good reminder, when we're thinking about phishing targets in an organization, the first things that tend to come to mind are targeting executives, right? Your gift card scams, targeting purchasing roles, trying to get them to wire funds somewhere. This is a great reminder that there are other valuable targets within the organization. If you are not one of those first to mind roles, think about what else you could potentially have access to that could have value to somebody that's looking to either get a foothold or to access some more of those resources.
Attackers go.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Attackers go after the money. That's where
Exactly.
the point.
And there's lots of places to find it with a little bit of extra legwork. Exactly.
Do you, Zoe, what were you thinking? So you were mentioning access, and we're talking about fake ads. Does this become essentially a business case for the attackers where they can get access to the account, get access to Google Ads, run more fake ads, and essentially just have a flywheel of, well, malvertising, essentially, is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
SEMrush.
Yeah, it definitely sounds, I don't know if it was mentioned in the article, but that definitely sounds viable. I mean, it's not all that different from targeting somebody's email account and using that address book to continue their campaign, right? Just slightly different process.
Yeah,
A great point.
there's plenty of examples of like that happening where, the fake ads are whatever version of affiliate links, right? Like clicking, literally just getting people to click on a thing that gets money somewhere, right? And if you
True.
in that scenario, it's like if you can authorize access to like ad spend accounts, like some of those at lots of companies have very high dollar limit set on.
Yeah.
Like, maybe you get 50% back, like, but that's a pretty high number still.
Yeah,
Right.
and at that point, the attackers have the option of, continuing to use that account that they got access to, or go sell the usable creds on the dark web.
Yep. It's just like crypto mining in cloud environments. It costs a crazy amount of money, but like, the pennies that come out are still worth money.
Yeah. It's not your money you're spending.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. What was it? Running the car 24 hours a day to solve algebra problems, right? And then there were a few different ransomware stories in the last week, but I think that one that was pretty interesting was the VS Code Marketplace having to remove some malicious extensions that were deploying ransomware. They contained code that downloaded and then executed a PowerShell payload from a control server, went into a folder and displayed a ransom message without payment instructions, which seems a little short-sighted. But I think that this is a good spot to talk about, kind of these sideways attacks going through developer extensions, or we also see a ton of zombie extensions within browsers that will ask for permissions while they are legitimate services, then at some point are no longer being developed or are compromised and taken over. And then folks are using that established install base to launch their own attacks. Mike, I know you've got some strong feelings about this. Any thoughts?
I feel like people forget that they're actually apps, like you're running apps that you just got out of a marketplace. Some of them are vetted, some of them aren't. It's a very interesting thing for me. Like Chrome extensions, Firefox extensions, that's just like running JavaScript in your browser. That's what it does. And it has access to whatever you give it access to. So sure, yeah, like however you can get a malicious app in there, like people are going to do it. Yeah, that's a big one where it's like there's plenty of them that people phish the developer account and they get access to their secrets to be able to push new app versions, right? Same thing happens on the Microsoft side, or like not, right? Like people just create useful apps that do a very minimal thing that people need, and it also tries to put ransomware on your device, apparently. Although it sounds like this one kind of maybe got out before it was done. Yeah, developer extensions there's a reason that the IDEs ask you if you want to install it because it's running code locally on your machine. Like, that's just how it works.
Yeah. I think one of the end user friendly changes that's happened in the last several years in mobile devices is not just letting people know what permissions are being requested when you're installing a new app, but also starting to periodically prompt you like, hey, you've been sharing contacts or you've been sharing location with this app for however long. Do you want to continue doing that? I'd love to see some of that make its way into the browsers. I like unobtrusive opt-out security processes, right? That will default to giving you stronger best practice advice and let you click that box and say, no, I'm okay with this. But definitely a great reminder for folks to keep in mind that, it's not necessarily just a reformatter or parser or even pretty theme in some cases. It can also represent some risk.
Yeah, just a friendly reminder in 3, 6, 9 months, go back and look at all those AI agents you installed as a Chrome extension or an IDE and just see if it's still something you want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mike,
Exactly.
we're pretty locked down in-house here. What are some things that orgs can do to stop their end users from downloading some of this stuff?
Yeah, on the browser side, like most modern browsers have a way to manage them via profile in however, like it's different per operating system, but usually they have controls inside of it, and then with that you can either allow or deny or like create a list or approval process. It's kind of a little bit different for each browser, but and there's tools out there that help with that. On the IDE side, it's the same thing, right? Like you can control what developers use in your in your environment. It's more just like going in and actually looking at the settings. It's not going to do it by default. Don't expect them to. Like, that's just not how it works.
Yeah. And if you stop a developer from doing something, they're probably going to figure out a way to do it anyways. So
They're
have
right.
a line of communication there.
It's like I look at it as like if they write the code for the app, great. Like we solved the problem.
Yep.
Totally. Yes.
So that's our roundup for this week. If you're making it here, thank you for tuning in, checking out our first of this new series. We're definitely going to keep refining this and improving on it. So, smash that comment, click that like button or whatever they tell us to say. Give us feedback. If there's things that you're curious about that we can let you know in these periodic updates that help make your job easier, that's the whole purpose of this. Any last thoughts or anything you want to leave folks with before we sign off for today, fellas?
I one of the topics we didn't talk about, but I'll just throw it out there for everyone. For those of you on Windows environments, please start moving away from batch files. Please start coming up with better ways to execute your stuff. The attackers are using them, and if you are not reviewing every batch file run, you will miss an attack. That is my tip for the week.
Solid tip.
Yeah, on the same note, it's just like, everything changes all the time. Like try to carve out some of your time to review settings, environments, assets, all of that stuff.
Wouldn't it be great if security was just set it and forget it, right? But things are rarely static in the business. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next week. This has been Blumira Briefings. Bye-bye, all.